If you look at India, that part of the mantra that comes in, Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya.
Jyotirgamaya.
That must be the first line of the new microgrid policy of India.
Welcome to the Blue Circle, and thank you all for joining in today. It's such a big privilege and a pleasure to reconnect with everyone, our distinguished panelists who are handpicked because of the think input and the rich experience they bring in. And thank you to our audience for joining us. We've received over 200 registrations and 90% of whom are CEOs and CXOs. Many of them are repeat visitors to our webinars, so which is very encouraging and motivates us to provide even higher levels of dialogue to the online channels as well. For those of you who are new with us today, the Blue Circle is an exclusive ecosystem to help business leaders manage disruptive times and become future ready. We focus on the 4 fundamental sectors, which are energy, e-mobility, healthcare, real estate, and infra. We also present socioeconomic insights which ultimately determine the evolving complexion of the market. In response to the COVID challenge, the Blue Circle has also accentuated its digital presence. One of the many modes we employ is our weekly webinar series, our digital publication. We're also building a hand-picked domain-focused expert pool drawn from within the leadership community, from our member base and its associates, that will guide businesses during and post-COVID across these 4 sectors. In addition to this, and you will be happy to know that we are very soon launching an exclusive digital platform for leaders, the LinkedIn for Leaders, wherein it will present them with the opportunity to connect with like-minded leaders. Will also house high-quality content and meaningful conversations. So those leaders among you who are interested, please do write to us. We're also starting the membership outreach very shortly. And the topic for today's session is Future of Microgrids in India. The discussion will focus on the development and execution of microgrids to improve the reliability and resilience of the grid, help the power supply tailor better community needs, and keep the nation moving towards a clean energy future. We've invited prominent practitioners and thought leaders from India and other parts of the world. And now, in the best interest of time, I will just quickly mention their respective names and designations. We have with us Mr. Adrian Panow, Director, Deakin Energy, Deakin University, Australia. We have with us Mr. Atem S. Ramsundersingh, Founder, CEO, and Board Director of WEnergy. Dr. Purandar Chakravarty, Head, Innovation and Alternate Energy, Nayara Energy. Mr. Sunil Wadhwa, Advisor to EY and ISA, and former MD, GE, TND, Tata Power DDL, and ILFS's EDCL. And our moderator for the session is Mr. Pavan Choudary, best-selling author, CEO of French MNC, and sits on several boards across the country. Welcome, sirs. So while there is a lot more to add regarding the remarkable work they have done in the energy domain, I will request the speakers to share as and when they get the chance. Kindly note, we will have Q&A towards the end of the session. Some of you have already shared excellent questions and they are now with the moderator. And now I request Mr. Choudary to please begin the session, sir.
Thank you very much, Siddharth. And it's a big pleasure to be with this panel, as well as with the distinguished audience. So, in 1920, Lenin said that communism will spread on the dual wheels of Soviet government power and electricity power. While communism had its ups and downs, even Soviet government power waxed and waned, but the other wheel of electricity power really spun. And today we can say that electricity is the greatest gift of science to mankind. It helps us work, live, learn, and play much better. So the march has been spectacular, but not without shortcomings. Because in terms of equity, electricity is still not available to everybody on the planet, and that is Really sad. In terms of economics, the right cost of electricity has not been reached. It can be cheaper. In terms of ecology, the electricity produced is not most environment friendly. And in terms of quality and reliability of power also, there is much to be desired. So, given this background, I would like to look at the emergence of microgrids, what they can and cannot do, and what is their future in India. So I'll invite first Adrian, who knows a lot about India, who has worked here. His organization has been here for the last 25 years, to tell us, to begin with, how would you like to define a microgrid, Adrian? And what is it that a microgrid can and cannot do?
Thank you, Pavan, for the introduction. And yes, some of your audience may be wondering why someone from Melbourne in Australia is participating. And I think that underlines a lot about microgrids, that they are international in their application, and they're flexible, and they respond to what the customer really needs. The definitions are many, and I think that still does underline that it is an emerging field, but there are four that are in common use. A microgrid itself, a nanogrid, a mini grid, and or even just calling it a grid itself. But essentially, it comes down to two things. One is either they're standalone power systems, so a remote power system, or they're grid connected. But in all cases, they serve just as real an energy source as a traditional power generator, as a coal generator, as a gas generator. But they have an enormous advantage that they are flexible, that they can respond to government, to a community's needs, and that they not only provide electricity, that they also can provide energy. And very carefully define the difference there, that energy can be in the form of heat, in the form of cooling, in the form of a liquid fuel, in the form of gas, of hydrogen, and that can all be embodied in this project. So in many ways, it doesn't matter what we call them exactly. They are an entity in their own right, and they are certainly emerging as a very legitimate part of the whole energy environment.
So great. Great point. So basically, you are saying that a microgrid is a self-contained electrical ecosystem, which is local in nature, which produces and distributes and consumes and monitors and manages electricity on its own. It might be in parallel to the grid, or it might be a standalone island kind of an entity. Great. Coming to what it can and what it cannot do, and after that I'll come to Atem to tell us what are the headwinds and the tailwinds for microgrids. Adrian.
Yes,
Is that Atem that you would like to answer, or?
No, I would like Adrian to finish this, that what is it that a microgrid can and cannot do? What are its abilities and what are its limitations? And thereafter I come to Atem to ask him what are the headwinds and the tailwinds for the microgrid industry and installation.
A microgrid can be as simple or as complex as is required by every situation. It can simply consist of solar panels and a battery and a way of controlling and distributing that electricity. Or it may be as complex as having solar and wind and a natural gas generator and multiple types of batteries and hydrogen. So they can do as much or as little as the situation requires. Obviously, there is a cost to doing that, and it's not only a cost of technology, a cost of complexity. But we're still in that stage where we're still defining what the needs are and what the possibilities are.
Okay, great. So, Atem, would you like to add anything to what Adrian has said? And then please answer our question as to what are the headwinds and the tailwinds for microgrids in the world today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Pavan. And thank you, Adrian, for setting the stage for microgrids. I think about, if you look into, if I can add a bit more nuance to the definition, it's really about power generation, transmission, and distribution, all in one package at the level of a building, a campus, a village, a township, a resort, or even an industrial estate. And it can be far away from the main grid, so-called national grid. So that means for business people, for investors, for industrial people, there is no limit anymore. You can go to a land, you can go to a mountaintop and build whatever you wish to build, your resort, your hotel, your industrial estate, like countries like Myanmar, Philippines. There is no limit. The old thinking of I can only go and invest and buy a piece of land, where the traditional distribution utilities can come and connect my factory, my township, my new housing project, etc., etc. You don't have to. There are several industrial estates emerging. People want to invest, people want to move things. Housing projects, they can't. Indonesia, Myanmar, name it, India, they can't, because they are so dependent on that one single cable coming from far, far, far away. Well, it's over. Now you can go work with companies like us, work with people like Adrian, and we can get it done. Why? Because you use local sources. The sun, the wind, and water is all nearby. Get it, tap it, it's God-given. Just use it and convert it and get clean and instant energy that has a quality that you can decide. And I think that is the power of distributed sort of generation, decentralized electrification, and automation, automatic. I mean, we are trying to build the next generation of microgrids. The first is not even over. We are trying to think about the next generation of so-called unmanned microgrids. The microgrid you see in my back, in the background, is in the Philippines. That one has almost 14 staff working. We're going to narrow down very soon, but because we are learning a lot on how these things can be automated and do not need so much of care. This is a hybrid of solar, diesel, and huge Tesla batteries running there to make sure that the power in the mix is 60% at least. Now, we have been running the grid for the last one year or so at 99.9% solar. Now, that is the beauty of decentralized microgrids, where you can go clean and quick. That is the addition to the definition of Adrian. And
superb addition. Superb addition. Yeah.
Yeah. So now when we talk about what is 8 years back, as I mentioned, 8 years back, nobody would dare to hold a conference, let alone a webinar or whatever, about microgrids or storage systems. Nobody. Everything was about solar, wind. Well, there was something else. There is in Southeast Asia alone, there is a need for about $30 billion per year of investment needed in expanding grid and power generation. The population is growing, the economies are booming, right? This is not only about village electrification. This is about industries, this is about universities, this is about mining projects that need electricity far away from the main grid. So I think the urgency right now is becoming popular, because you can't deny 900 million people across the globe who have no access to electricity. You can't deny the 300 to 400 people in India who have no access to electricity. You can't deny the fact that 100,000 plus microgrids are needed in Africa. You can't deny the 100 million people in Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Myanmar, Philippines. You can't deny it. So I think that is the urgency driving the fact that first, you don't want those 900 people to all go and burn diesel or wood or whatever, and kill the whole climate idea by adding 900 million more people to so-called energy needs, which is polluting. So that drives the whole thing.
The inequity is well explained. Coming to the second part of the question, which was, what do you see are the headwinds for microgrids? Let us come to the headwinds first.
Well, depends on what you mean with headwinds.
Headwinds means obstacles to microgrids.
You know, there are many. First of all, let me start with the governments. Governments don't have their act together. In many countries, India included, Philippines included, Myanmar included, they don't have the act together in putting regulations in terms of defining the technology, the configurations, the way to evaluate technology, and the way to engage private sector. This 27 to 30 billion that I've talked about per year that is demanded to finance growth of our transmission and distribution networks and clean power generation, that $30 billion is not in the cash in the central banks of governments. They have too many needs. They've spent waste money on subsidization of fossil fuels, diesel, coal. That's where their attention is. That's where the political economy is right now with their attention. Where we need to go is to address the lack of rules, lack of proper regulations to engage private sector, lack of rules and regulations and policies to use the right methodologies to evaluate investments and private sector engagements in microgrid. That's all over the place. The other thing at the level is the banks, financing institutions. Financing institutions do have a lot of experience in financing mortgages and financing car loans and financing equipment loans to industries. But when it comes to financing microgrids, they absolutely run nuts because they don't have their act together. Their traditional evaluation methodologies for risk assessments are not in place. So they deny, they neglect. There are a few exceptions out there. The World Bank finally, after 7-8 years, caught up on financing governments on microgrid and electrification. There are a few other banks out there, like the Development Bank of the Philippines, are doing some of these things. There are banks waking up to work with companies like ours to understand the risk and to go into this path, because it is an investment that contributes to the sustainable development goals. So that's the second problem we see and encounter all over the world, actually. The third and the last has to do with the manufacturing industry. We see that the manufacturing industry, name it, Siemens, ABB, all these guys, Schneider, everyone is developing, and yeah, I call name because I challenge the CEOs of these companies to enter into a dialogue with us to understand that microgrids, hundreds of thousands of microgrids needs to be developed at different scales. And none of these companies are able to build equipment that can help companies like us to do proper cost-effective system integration for small-scale electrification projects. You want to buy smart meters that are connected to the cloud and give you the data of how a consumer is using electricity. You can't buy 1,000 pieces for a village because the minimum quantity these big companies only offer is 10,000. So their entire production supply chain is geared towards cities and the existing big national grids and centralized national big corporations or operators of power grids. It is not yet designed for that. I mean, why would I buy a power management system that cost me $1 million if the total investment for a village would require only $500,000, including the power grid? It doesn't make sense. So these three things, in my view, are the headwinds, but things are changing.
Excellent. So I think you and Adrian played beautifully as a team, and he very well set the stage, to which you added that the 4 types of microgrids could be a community, could be a which is a residence cluster, an industry captive microgrid, a commercial captive, or even a utility captive microgrid like a fire or water utility or military establishment. Then you spoke about the distribution and also the decentralization this offers and the democratic nature of a microgrid, which depends on whether the sun shines, the wind blows, and the rivers flow. Great. And you spoke about the headwinds where the governments they do not understand, they don't have their act together. Earlier you had also said that most of the bureaucrats are not even on social media, so they are not updated on these things. The lack of regulation as well as the lack of regulator familiarity. And in terms of investment, you spoke about the fact that the space is not familiar to the investor, the market has not matured, and the scalability is not there. And on the last point, why we are not getting enough support from the existing big players in the grid sector, also you had several points to make, which I will come to separately, because that's a very important point to look at as to how to get them interested in this game. Very well made points, Atem and Adrian. Coming to Purandar. Purandar, what do you think is the future of microgrids in India? Where is the microgrid piece going in India? Purandar.
Thank you, Pavan, for this opportunity, and thank you, organizers. See, you raised a very interesting point. And, I'm directly going from what Adrian said and what Atem added. Point comes is that when we look at our own country, let me first of all see that how do you connect the two with our existing, the utility grid and all this, the entire infrastructure. See, let us look at the current distribution system, the way it is. We have GenCos, they are generating, centralized power, and that power is getting distributed across the length and breadth of the country. The point comes is, utilities are given a mandate that they need to supply power everywhere. The issue comes that if they go to the remotest of the places, the utilization of that power is very limited. So look at it from the economics perspective, it doesn't really make great sense for a utility to go all the way to that place. Add to that, India has taken on a self-imposed, commitment that India is going to reduce its emission intensities to 30 to 35% by the year 2030 from the level of, 2005. Now comes the point that how do you do this? To do this, there has to be a focus on renewable energy. Now, the focus on renewable energy has been very nicely brought out by the government at different levels, different kind of regulations. One of the interesting regulations that has come by to support this whole process is Renewable Power Obligation, RPO. Now, in RPO, what happens is that every year there is a slab, and those which are, entities which are supposed to comply by the regulation, their implication as far as the share of renewable power is concerned keeps on increasing. In simple words, it means that if you are generating X amount of energy, then a certain percentage of energy has to come from renewable. Now, as a result of that, what has actually happened is, in India, the renewable, power, which was in 2015, somewhere around, the ratio was somewhere around 26.8 gigawatts of renewable, has gone up to 87 gigawatts currently. Now, if you really, on the other side, you look at, out of the 370 gigawatt of installed capacity, what is our peak demand? It is only 185 gigawatts. What it means? That means the rest of the installation that has been made is more like a sunk cost. Now, why it is happening? It is happening because we are enhancing the ratio of renewable in the entire system, in this mega system called power distribution network. But we are forgetting the fact that the renewable is basically a distributed form of energy. It is best served locally. So what we are instead doing is that we are setting up mega plants, 100 megawatt plants, 200 megawatt plants, 800 megawatts plant at a utility scale, and then generating that power and transmitting at a far off place. What is happening? We all know that renewable power is cheap. It is cheap, certainly. But then renewable power has got the problem of intermittency, which essentially means that on a 24-hour cycle, it only generates for the solar typically about 20% of the time. That means if you need 100 megawatt of power to be replaced with renewable, you have to have 5 times the installed capacity of that, which essentially means that 5 times the capacity, which is something like 500 megawatt of power, would get generated for 20% of the total time. And that 20% of the total time, it has to be absorbed by the grid on a renewable first basis, which essentially means that your base load power plants, which are the thermal power plant, they have to be turned down. And when they turn down, what happens? You are operating that plant at a low plant load factor. So progressively in this country, somewhere about 4 or 5 years back, where the plant load factor was somewhere around 75%, it has come down to now 55%, which is just the technical limit and below which you cannot go. Now look at it from the perspective of the utility. Utility has got a long-term agreement with these gencos. So they need to buy this power. They need to pay the fixed charges, even if they are not evacuating the power. Now, where is this, the whole expenses going? It is coming back to the consumer. And that is one of the major reasons that our tariffs are going up. So renewable power, though it is very cheap and everybody talks about that it could be 3 rupees, it could be less than 3 rupees and all that, actual cost of generation when it is delivered with all the infrastructural costs taken could work out to be in the range of around 5 rupees 15 paisa in this country. This is on the basis of a CES study. So now you see the dichotomy. And what is the answer to this? Answer is what my colleague Atem said, what my colleague Adrian said.
Absolutely. Working in tandem, in parallel. Before I come to Sunil, I would like to hear what Adrian has to say on the capacity factor, which you have so beautifully brought in. It's so clear, even to people who are just elementary scholars of this area. It was a very well made point, Purandar. Thank you very much. I'm coming to Sunil in a moment. But before that, to Adrian, on what do you feel about the capacity factor point made by Purandar?
Yes, Purandar, certainly in Australia, the opponents of renewable energy often use the same argument that if solar only works for 20% of the time, you have to build 5 times as much energy. In Australia, on the national electricity market and the grid, we have over 400 generators. And if you look at an open cycle gas generator, it only operates at a 2% capacity factor. So we don't have to build another 5. We just have to create a system where those generators can interact. And a microgrid plays into that space because it provides part of that system. And so it's a very great disruptor to our traditional approach to electricity generation. I can see Atem nodding, and we have to break this pattern of thought in the legacy generators and in the legacy system and even in the legacy regulators, because this is a new way of the world.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I tend to concur with that because the microgrid can dynamically engage with the grid and change the direction of power flow based on the combination of local load, local supply, and external grid conditions. This is my view. It might not be everybody's view, but I'm just putting it here before I go to Atem, who raised his hand, and then come back to Sunil for his first comment. Atem.
Yeah, Pavan and Purandar, the classical thing I understand of base load and renewable intermittency, we deal with that in our microgrid, where sun is intermittent, it changes every minute, but the power quality thanks to the use of batteries, energy storage systems. In our case, is a battery. It could also be for larger scale grid you are talking about with gas power plants and coal power plant, right? It could be hydro storage systems to be used in a sort of like China is doing and some other countries. So battery is creating the most stable, the highest quality of electricity being provided to people. Frequency, current, and voltage are the highest quality than the traditional power utilities out there. Right? So I think the reason for thinking like this on renewables and the use of intermittent sources is to put policies and regulations and financing mechanisms in place that are enabling distribution utilities to use energy storage and sophisticated power grid management systems. Because it's a lousy argument to say, well, we got to protect those guys signed the contract. Sorry, you don't fit into a 21st century world anymore. And your business need to consider that the political will of people will dictate new rules, and new rules will dictate new contract negotiations. Simple as that. This is not about money. This is about saving the planet. It's the climate objective that we have to respect and to obey. Yes, and if I need to abort or reduce your contract, I will do that if I gain political power.
So, okay, I think Purandar has something to say, and I will also not leave Purandar alone, and I also have something to bring from his side. Purandar.
Thank you, Pavan. Atem, I just wanted to support you by saying that if we work in an ecosystem which has the large grid along with the microgrid working in parallel and in synchronization, we achieve everything. We save the planet, we make the best use of renewables, we make the best use of technology. Now, this is where the point comes that we need to use a technology depending on what it is meant for. If you are using a distributed power generation technology as a centralized power generation technology, you are making a fundamental mistake. So, separate them out and use a mix of all that. So microgrid is the answer in the utility that it can bring about this change. That was the point.
Great point. And I also have some point to make, but before that, let us go to Sunil. Sunil has been very patiently listening to all of us, and he has a lot of experience in this space. He has headed GE Electric. So let us ask him what is his view on the discussion which is happening. Sunil, thank you for so patiently listening to us, and the floor is yours. Sunil. We can't hear you. We can't hear you, Sunil. No, we cannot hear. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. No, I said I've been listening, and I don't know what is left out.
I think your expertise is left out. Sorry, it got. I think we have worked up the case for you. Now
I remember reading one very nice line today saying that I have a lot of hidden talent, but I have forgotten where I've kept it. So anyway,
that is very kind
of. I think I'll talk from the perspective of who are the takers of this solution, because ultimately all good things have to make commercial sense, and therefore having worked in the DISCOM and also in terms of being able to convince, I will go into the why part of the subject today. There are 4 elements of anything that we do in our lives. One is the why part. So is there a business case, and is it for all? Once the why is sorted out, which I will try to, then we have to deal with the how part, and then the what and who. I think the what is been discussed in great detail today as to what is microgrid, what should it do, what it cannot do, and who will do it. I think you all have people here in the audience and also in the panel who are there to do all that. On the why part, I think in the particular context of India, if you see the discoms are in a real peril today financially. They are not in a position to comply with their universal supply obligation because the consumers who are left out are the lowest paying consumers. So for them to be able to make power available, there is a cost involved, which is much more than what they will recover from those consumers. So this is the key point. Now, coupled with this is the fact that any further capacity additions in terms of the power supply will have to be from renewables. We can argue, yes, why not, why, but that is a enforced situation for us. Thirdly, if any power substitution has to take place, let's say more power coming in place of decommissioned plants will also be renewable. Now, the next point comes from to supply an X million units of renewable, the cost of transmission is generally about 3 times what the thermal would have been, because the capacity utilization of the transmission is about 3 times, roughly 3 times less than if it was thermal. So the transmission therefore is going to be the biggest cost of supplying renewable power. Now, I give you simple analogy. If I have to supply fruits to all my citizens of this country, would I centralize it, or why don't I have orchards where the fruits can be grown? Okay, so and not incur cost of transportation. I'm just making it so simple. So if going forward, all renewable will need transmission, which will cost 3 times what it normally costs. Why do we need transmission if the power can be generated where it is needed? So there are 2 things that we kill 2 birds in one way. We bring power very fast to the consumers who need it. We bring it at a much lower cost than if it was done through utility scale projects, which have to be housed where the interstate transmission systems are there, which will also cost ultimately to somebody. So the logic of having microgrids in India is great, is economically more viable for the discoms and therefore to the consumers, and is the fastest way to get power to the consumers. I remember having made one suggestion, I will not name the chief minister of a particular state, where I said, sir, he was talking about microgrid. I said, sir, forget everything. If I allow you to make a statement in the assembly that you will make power available to all villagers at 3 rupees in 7 months. And this is the power cost which is payable by the cities, by the cousins of those villagers, and not at 18 rupees that you have been talking about. He said, how? I said, leave it to me. He said, I'll be very happy to make that statement. Now comes the question of, so having dealt with the why part of it, Indian discoms, if they were presented by with a solution of having the power at the load centers, all renewable, meeting their RP obligations at a cost almost half of what they would have to incur had they, suppose they were to supply through utility scale, there is no question of saying no. Now, why it is not today a successful business model is that microgrids have been all done in the either as a CSR projects or as demonstration projects, pilot projects, without any specific policy in place. Now, the only way I think now I deal with the question of how do you make such an economically viable proposition scalable. So today, most of the, I would say all the microgrids have bilateral contracts. There is the owner of the microgrid who eventually owns the investment and has to recover, and there is the consumer. Now, the two are independent of the regulations. The risk that the microgrid owner carries is of being stranded anytime the distribution company prefers to start supplying power on its own. So they probably look at a 10-year amortization of a plant which actually needs to be amortized over 25 years. With the result, the entire cost of that power, amortized over half the payback period normally, comes to about 20 rupees. Now, is it fair for a consumer who deserves the lowest cost of power, the lowest charges for power, to be charged with 20 rupees? And they are charged very impliedly through 120 rupees, 170 rupees per point per annum, per month, and restricting the supply to only X kilowatt or X units. So I think there has to be a tripartite agreement model where the DISCOM is deemed to be the purchaser of all the power. The entity which does the microgrid does the generation, distribution, billing, O&M, everything, charges the consumer what the state distribution would have charged. The remaining is paid by the DISCOM, and all the RP obligations go to them. This model has been tested and approved by the Attorney General of India 10 years back, more than 10 years back. So I would therefore invite discussion on this kind of a model, which is de-risked, and we will see maybe more than 100, maybe a million microgrids very, very soon.
Excellent. Excellent rounding off, of course, raising of more points also for discussion. What you said was commercial viability is paramount. That means, in other words, you're saying that to do good, you have to do well. You cannot feed from an empty vessel. If a vessel is leaking, it will not be adopted by business. This is the first point which you're making. The second point which you've made regarding storage, or Purandar had made regarding storage, and Atem had responded to that. I have another point from Purandar's side to add to this discussion. That even today, the lithium ferrophosphate battery, which has got the Nobel Prize for chemistry, that is also not making the entire cost viable, nor is the zinc bromide battery. So there is this costing issue, and there is a question also which has come, and this tells that the audience is extremely aware that in Europe, where nuclear energy is proving to be much more economical than renewable energy, there is a case for continuance of nuclear energy, which even after the distribution losses of around 20% is more economical. So given these points, I would like now Adrian and Atem to come in regarding this discussion. Adrian.
I will start, and it was another question that I saw asked in the Q&A about the sustainability of microgrids when the grid is unreliable. There is a clear difference between cost and affordability, and the reason that current electricity, particularly in India, is cheap perhaps is linked very strongly to the fact that it's also unreliable. And you, as a social advantage of microgrids, you can supply reliable electricity with a particular quality to factories, to villages, that allows them to create new businesses, new enterprises that simply wouldn't exist if you had unreliable electricity or electricity of poor quality. So it creates a shift in society that on a micro scale, you can start to really change how society operates. With respect to the nuclear question, there's a throwaway line in the solar industry that the fuel for solar energy isn't the sun, it's money. And that model of over-subsidizing the early renewable generation, again, is one of those myths that has persisted. Solar and wind, and particularly wind in Australia, is now the cheapest new build form of generation. The same applies to nuclear. the cost of building a new nuclear power plant is not only expensive in terms of cost, but it's very expensive in terms of community engagement and social license. So we now need to look at how do we do the next generation of electricity generation. And particularly as the discussion is around India, it is unlikely that you would do that with centralized generation and an equivalent cost in transmission and distribution, if there is a viable alternative, and I believe that is in the microgrid space. I didn't mention the background to my my image here is Deakin University's own microgrid, which is 7 megawatts of ground mount solar, single axis tracking, 2 megawatt hour LFP battery, small solar 250 kilowatts plus small batteries, all brought together with a microgrid controller. It talks to scale. It supplies about half of the university campus's consumption, about 14,000 gigawatt hours a year from this plant. It is, and that is the other element of microgrids. They are scalable. They are scalable in response to the need where you are constructing it. And if that need, suddenly a new enterprise develops, you can expand, and you can expand at a marginal cost rather than having to build a new gas generator or a new coal-fired generator.
Yeah, great points. And just to add from your side, most of the technologies, almost all technologies, begin as expensive and then they become cheaper. Solar has already shown that once again, and even wind turbine. And I was reminded of vacuum cleaners when it came. They were the cost of almost the cost of a car. And then the price of the car came down substantially, and the price of vacuum cleaners became a very small fraction. And we are also susceptible to the Parmenides fallacy. This fallacy, Parmenides fallacy, is we compare the present to the future, one of the future scenarios, rather than comparing the future scenarios to alternate for future scenarios, where the cost of solar may go down. I would like you to add to this discussion, Atem.
Pavan, can you just give me, remind me what your original question was on this? I missed it.
So the original question is that the commercial case is very important. Everybody is not equally societally conscious. And sometimes it is fashionable also to be societally conscious. The true crusaders like you may be very few, but there might be many people who find that the crusade may be showing them in a particular light. So what is very important is to have the commercial case, and Sunil said that, and Purandar also, that how we can improve the commercial case and bring the investor into this piece for some market incentive coming to him when he invests money in this area.
Yeah, clear. Thank you. Look, the commercial case can be made for microgrids when, first of all, there is a demand. The demand must be there. Demand from varying from illuminating a household, lights, to cooling, to cooking, to productivity, more village level, cold storages, etc., etc. There are different demands. If the demand is there, it's a matter of sizing. Then comes the technology cost, where many things have been said about that. The good news is cost is going down. However, what I flagged is that the existing manufacturing industry isn't making moves yet into creating equipment or components that are cost effective for small scale usage. It will come. There is a lot of promise out there. There's a huge market out there. So I believe it will come. We've seen the cost of batteries going down. 7 years ago, you really had to have a lot of courage to use batteries as a storage system in your microgrid. We've seen that coming down. And it is not done. It's not over yet. There's so much in the laboratories going on. What is essential is how you structure your financing. In microgrids, to make microgrids commercially viable, we as investors, we are not only builders. We design, we build, we own, we operate, we finance, we bring all the stakeholders together to make it happen. Now, when you do that, the nature of decentralization or decentralized, there was yesterday in a webinar where I said that while microgrids require relatively small amounts of money, it is not only the quantity of money that is important to get things done, but it is also the cost of that capital. What is the cost of the loan? What is the cost for equity? To mix together in the right proportions to make the cost per kilowatt hour affordable and reasonable for industry or the local population or poor populations out there, right? So we spend a lot of time in business modeling, not financial modeling and Excel playing, but rather really thinking through, understanding the communities out there, looking at the business that are happening out there, going onto the site to understand, count the numbers, to see how could we structure the tariff structure, the financing structure in such a way, and then even feed back to the technology configuration to cut down on capex and so on, to make a very customized solution happen. That effort is required. It is not a cookie cutter solution as such. I mean, now the beautiful thing is where we are working in our next stage is where a lot of these small projects out there can be bundled. You can bundle it big. And when you bundle it big, it becomes attractive for loan swaps. Looking into the banking world, who says, well, I'm not interested in financing a small scale microgrid and not 100 of them. But if you bundle them in a portfolio, then financing for the bigger financing institutions become interested. And there are several cases right now where you see things are working out in different business models. And I think that gives hope that the private sector engagement. I mean, our company work with crowdfunders from the Netherlands. We have 1,000 crowdfunders from the Netherlands. Daddies, mummies, uncles, aunties, who spent €1,000 or 5,000 euros to get money to enable you. But if you pack the many microgrids to, let's say, a package of 100 million, then that 100 million can be restructured and can even make things more commercially attractive for companies like ours.
Yeah, very good. So basically what you're saying is that the sunk cost of the big players who are in the grid space are so high that they are not likely to invest in the microgrid space technology without fearing some kind of a disruption in their parent sector. So what I recommend here is inclusive innovation, which for example was tried in US. When they were phasing out CFCs, they realized companies like DuPont, which were manufacturing CFCs, which were considered harmful for the climate, they will be hurt most. So they made them partners in the process of discovering alternative gases in place of CFCs, so that they could benefit through that change. The second is in the case of EVs. When automobile manufacturers, it was felt, are not likely to invest in EVs because their investment in ICE engine is too high, then the EV space was broadened from electric vehicles to plug-in hybrids, etc., which would keep that new turf also attractive to ICE engine manufacturers. So, and blockchain, a lot of questions are coming on blockchain. When the banks have realized that blockchain may hit them tomorrow, they have started investing in banks, in blockchain a lot. So I think that kind of an approach from the big players can make this area also come up. Coming back to Purandar, what do you feel about the arguments which Adrian and Atem have made? Given if we were to factor in what both of them have said and Sunil, where do you think the microgrids can go in the Indian geography and the Indian power space? Purandar.
Yes, Pavan, I think all the points made were really meaningful. What I would like to add here is that there is a typical argument, very genuine argument, which is made when it comes to a domain called climate change, is that we have a collective responsibility to save the planet, and therefore we should do the right kind of things. What happens is that I'm not saying that there are no leaders or no volunteers who not do that. But let us look at the fact of life. That fact of life is economics. And when you look at this part, the commercial part or the economics part or the business part, what happens is that this argument gets stretched into a dimension that it is a responsibility, it's a social responsibility, it's a moral responsibility, and therefore we should do that. Now just think of it. Can we define climate change as a business case? And if we are successful in doing it, don't you think that the businesses will wake up and climate change, they will do things for climate change? And if they do so, what happens is that you are actually tapping the huge commercial might of this globe, which would help climate change come by. And as a result of that, the planet will be saved. So the point comes here is that you cannot undermine that dimension altogether. Now, in a space of power and in the space of energy, see, I belong to an energy company, Nayara Energy, which is essentially a refiner, oil company, and we make fuels. Now, this energy space, and so is the case with the power space, it is greatly dominated by different kind of regulations. And whosoever is the player has to operate within the regulation. Now, that is where the point made by Sunil is extremely important, that we need to work towards the regulations. We need to bring those regulations, collectively. I think it is our collective responsibility to really do that. Should we be able to do that, then comes the point that we should connect right kind of business models here. Because there is a certain space which can get governed with very definite commitment, very definite, approach, and very focused kind of an execution in a limited way. For example, in a remote area, maybe I have a campus which I would like to, separate out in an island mode and have, some microgrid prevailing there. I'm talking in Indian context, and get a special permission for that from the regulator. All that is fine. But if we want to bring about a change, we really need to work towards the regulation. Make that as a possibility. The moment that happens as a possibility, I'm pretty sure there are very good players in this country. There are very evolved business models. Today, for example, you take the renewables. Renewables not only are cheap, there are fantastic business models available, which hardly make you pay anything, and at the same time you can get the power. Point comes is that so long as you generate that renewable for the local use, it is fantastic. The moment you think about generating the renewable and transporting that green power 100 kilometers away or 1000 kilometers away, there comes the problem. So it is more of a management issue. It is more of a regulatory issue that we need to address.
So the point which you're making is economics versus ecology. There have been a lot of very fine researches done on this, which mostly point out to the fact that if the economics doesn't work, then as you said, ecology will not be, ecological goals will not be taken up. The second point which you are making is regulations. So there are points for regulations and against regulations. There are a lot of times people have complained about regulations, that the regulations were not made, which were made were not thorough, and they have, rather than facilitating growth, have actually hindered growth of the sector through unintended consequences. I would like to come back to Sunil and take his comments on this before going back to Adrian and Atem. Sunil.
Yeah. I think we are now finally narrowing down to the crux of the whole issue. And 2 points, Pavan, you made, and happy that you made, economy and ecology. So there are two ecos. And I think the microgrid, I don't want to spend time on analyzing why I'm saying what I'm saying. Microgrid, basically, there is no versus here. Ecologically and economically, both the best. Now we talk about, for example, trying to make a business case because of environment. The presumption is, oh, because it's expensive, so I'm trying to use the handle of environment. Okay. So if you look at environmentally friendly power, it is renewable. Now within renewable, why do I have to go to the expensive way of renewable? I go to microgrids. So it is economically and ecologically the best. So there is no brainer. So I think it's out of the way that microgrid is the most environment friendly and pocket friendly solution. Next question comes is it required in India? Does it give some other advantages also which make it even more compelling? One advantage, it can reduce the cycle time for getting the power reach the consumers. From the time you make a decision to the time actually the consumer starts seeing the advantage of having the power and the multiplier effect in terms of employment, in terms of income generation, blah 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 blah. We all know the power is a very political subject, so politicians will be very happy that if before the elections they can make sure everybody gets power, and that too cheaper. Now coming to the regulations, I have analyzed it threadbare, line by line, and as I said 10 years back, we had sent this model of a tripartite agreement, of which one agreement already exists, an obligation exists between a DISCOM and a consumer in the rural areas that he has to be supplied power. Theoretically, if I was a rural guy, I would have gone in the court saying why I'm not getting power. The licensee has been given a license to supply power in that area. Nobody can supply power to me other than Mr. DISCOM, and they are not supplying me power. So it's a PIL case. Anyway, coming to regulations, the Section 4 of the Electricity Act does permit the DISCOMs to deploy franchisees in rural areas without having to take any further sub-licensing permissions, who will generate and distribute power on behalf of the DISCOMs. So the regulation exists. In fact, one would go to the extent of saying, DISCOMs, please invoke this regulation. You are deficient in your governance if you do not invoke this regulation. You are allowed to do this, you are duty bound to do this, you're not doing it. So what remains finally is a contract and a tender. So the DISCOMs need to be reminded that there is a Section 4 which allows you to deploy franchisees on a competitive bidding basis. Please define the scope of that offering, which will include renewable generation, sub-transmission system, billing, O&M, collection, and please charge a rate. Whoever is the lowest will get the job. So I don't think, frankly, I'm a bit frustrated that we are trying to not frustrated in the sense with this panel, but generally, that we are trying to say what is the solution. Solution lies in the law, and the models can be several. So I would therefore recommend that all the entire audience of the panel listeners read about the what part and how part. It's very easy. The point made by Atem, I would have a slightly different perspective, that there's a need to reduce costs and all that. The moment you have a competitive bidding in front of you, cost reductions will take place. So if you are the best in technology but expensive, too bad. Unless there is a T&C formula and you're given a slightly higher score on the technology part, which is very rare. So I think the need is to work towards making the DISCOMs aware that this solution lies in front of them, making the rural areas, the politicians, the local MLAs, MPs aware that there is a solution which can give you a right to make a statement in the assembly saying, I will provide power to all rural villagers in 8 months at 3 rupees or whatever is the tariff. Thank you.
No, very, very good points. In fact, you have added 2 points here. Why microgrids have a good future in India. One is low gestation period. And the second is you have also said that that ecology and economics goes simultaneously, in your opinion. Very well. So I would like to now start closing the session by asking each of you this question. Why do you feel, because more or less you're all on the same page now, why do you feel that microgrids is the way going forward in India? Low gestation period and ecology and economics is the point which Sunil has made. What is the point which you would like to make, Purandar? And then I'll come to Atem. Then I'll come to Adrian and close it with Atem. Purandar.
Yes, Pavan. See, the point is here that microgrid, I mean, take it standalone as a subject. I think it has loads and loads of benefit. Biggest benefit comes from the fact that it gives a tremendous amount of resilience locally. Resilience because that in case of any kind of a grid outage or anything that happens, if it is served by a microgrid that can detach itself from the main grid, it can continue to work should that be the case. It can again come back and get connected to the grid when the need be or when the requirement be, and thereby maintain a seamless kind of availability of power. It is also something which can recover fast because it is local. The cost of power most of the time can come down to be meaningful within the meaningful range. One can employ or rather deploy a lot of technologies in parallel with each other. So it could be solar, it could, among the renewable, it could be solar, it could be wind, it could be varieties of energy storage systems, and so on and so forth. In fact, we did a small project ourselves, of course not in microgrid, but it was like integration of solar with the grid, with the DG and so on, various kinds of technologies. And what we realized was that the control systems today, the technologies do exist in such a beautiful manner that you can actually achieve a fantastic availability of local grid within your small premises most of the time. Now, these kind of localized solutions are very much possible through microgrid. Now, these become difficult when you talk about a centralized grid trying to serve you. Very recently, I mean, I live in Mumbai. Just about 2 weeks back, there was heavy rains in Mumbai, and certain parts of the main, this upmarket Mumbai, I must say so, were disconnected, and they were disconnected for a period of something like 1 week. Just imagine in the the financial capital of the country, this is the kind of things happen. Now, why it is happening? I mean, just think of it that if there was a microgrid, most of these problems would not have been there, because it is the scale which typically makes it come back much faster. So just to summarize, what it means is that you look at it from the perspective of the larger regulations, you look at it from the perspective of technology, you look at it from the perspective of making power available to people or to a small cluster of load points. Microgrid definitely serves a solution, and this is what is the real path to grow. If we are trying to say that, okay, we will provide electricity to everybody, because providing electricity to everybody does not mean that you should follow a certain path. You have to always embrace technologies, always embrace ways that can happen. Of course, it would require different kind of the financial structuring, modeling, and all that, and developing a business case. All that has to happen. So these are inseparable part of the whole.
Great points. Financial modeling also can be supported because of the presence of impact funds in the world. $3 trillion is available. Coming to Adrian, what is your experience in Australia and India, which makes you feel that for India, microgrids is the way forward?
First comment, it ties very much what Sunil and Purandar just said. Our regulators were established in a much simpler time. Electrons flowed in one direction, from a central power station to the consumer. Now they're flowing in both directions. And on top of that, the changes in the system are much more rapid. In Australia, finally, we have a 5-minute settlement on price on the grid, but it's taken years to get to that point, almost a generational change. And that sort of change suddenly makes large-scale battery storage viable in the system, because it's actually addressing the actual needs of the consumers that the technology has enabled. Microgrids do the same thing. Only now, right now, we're seeing a change in the regulations that allows a microgrid to be an alternative, a regulatory and technical alternative to stretching a new power line. And so immediately, you have a viable solution that has been created through a regulatory change, not necessarily a technical one. And it was a comment that Atem made when we were preparing for this webinar the other day, that microgrids are not a last mile solution. They are perhaps the last 10 mile, or they are an infinite mile solution because no grid exists. And I think that is the opportunity, that we don't have to have the huge sunk investment in assets that may be wrong. And power lines in particular are often stranded because just the community changes, need changes. And that's where I think microgrids play an essential role, that we can be flexible, we can be resilient, and we can provide a solution that is required in that place at the right time at an affordable cost.
You very well put the point that when facts change, positions should change. Earlier, electrons were flowing only in one direction. But today, the producer has also become the consumer. And that is why we use the word prosumers in the microgrid space. So very well made point. Atem, what would be your final comments on why microgrids is the way forward in India?
Thanks, Pavan. Well, look, I would like to add on Adrian, it's not only about the electrons flowing in two directions. There is also money flowing in multiple directions these days. Because of democratization of capital, the mom and the aunt are able to put small money to create something big and something good across and far away from their own countries. A mom or an uncle in the Netherlands can support a village in India by financing a microgrid. That is the beautiful world. Capital and power, electricity is not a game for big electric corporations nor big electric companies. When we talked about this, I'll give you an example of Germany. The renewable energy sources in Germany, over 100 gigawatt today. Guess who are the owners of those systems today? Not the 4 or 5 big power corporations. Actually, they lost business because they thought it's a dream, it's a fantasy, it's something for hippies, renewable energy. Today, more than 40% of those systems are used by entire new investors across the board. So capital liberation is gonna change that scene. And I think India, with a good tradition of community involvement, family involvement, needs to be mobilized to expand and provide electricity to the 300 to 400 million people that live in darkness in India of today. While India is launching satellites and send things to the moon, there are 400 hungry mouths and people living in darkness. So let us use the opportunity that technology is offering us. Let us use the opportunity that capital is there, Let us use the technologies of blockchain to add value to that. Now, why should India do that? Because first of all, 400 million new producers will add significant value to India's GDP. 400 million people will feel more safe, especially the women and the girls would feel more safe when they have light in the streets and in the villages. I'm not telling you fantasies here. I'm telling you about my conversations with people. When you talk to women and you ask, why was this electricity so important for you in your village? The number one is not light or cooling or an aircon. The number one reason a woman will give you, a mother will give you, is safety, security. Don't underestimate those values for economic development. Now, that is the opportunity that, in my view, needs to drive microgrid in India, but also in ASEAN, South America, and Africa, because the rural communities and those communities are the ones that gives us the opportunity not to be choked in our own smoke because they use the wrong power source. Thank you.
Yeah. Great point. In fact, you very nostalgically brought about the darkness which 400 million people are facing and the danger which these women face because of lack of illumination, which brought to my mind the case of the light bulb. And that is the biggest step we saw. Electrification did not happen because we wanted to send electricity into homes. It happened because we wanted to send light into homes. It was a bulb. It was the bulb which came and which was opposed by so many scientists of that time, that what Edison has made is not feasible because it requires power generation and then transmission of powers and power and the lines coming into your homes, and then the bulb will glow. But the bulb was such a great dramatic invention that when the government did not agree, Edison himself created the entire infrastructure. And that is how Edison Electric was born and General Electric was born. And then the rest they say is history. Yeah, go ahead.
Just a small addition. Let's forget Edison and Tesla for now. If you look at India, that part of the mantra that comes in, Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya.
Jyotirgamaya.
That must be the first line of the new microgrid policy of India. I leave it to them.
We will surely pass this on. And the other dream, one dream of Edison has been completed. But the other dream, when he said we will make electricity so cheap that only the rich will burn candles, I think that dream can happen through microgrids and them playing in dynamic interplay with the grid. And Tamsoma Jyotirgamaya is a great chant you shared with us, and I will surely pass it on, and it will reach, I'm sure, the right people. And on that note, I close this session. Thank you very much. And thank you for staying back in such large numbers, this great audience, and many of them are repeat visitors. Thank you very much to you, as well as to this knowledgeable, informed, and passionate panel.